Jackal Among Snakes. Author, Nemorosus. Chapter 171, Out of Containment. The Margrave leaned back in his chair at the dining table, staring at his now empty platter of food. He tapped one foot on the ground, glancing towards the door. Argrave had still yet to return. Reinhardt's old friend, Duke Enrico, had been entirely right from the beginning. Having a motive other than mere rebellion would be a good for the rebellion, upsetting though it might be. The Margrave did not wish to play the kingmaker. He merely wished to do what was right. But part of doing what was right was accepting the tragic realities of the world. Few people, least of all the nobles beneath the heel of Vaska, acted with righteous intentions. For all intents and purposes, Argrave doused their flames of ambition. He would be Reinhardt's claimant, and with an undisputed figure, the opportunist's influence would be mitigated after the war ended. From all that he'd talked about with Argrave, he'd come to know the man better. He was far closer in character to someone like Enrico than Reinhardt himself. The Duke of Maeteth had transformed his seat into a bastion of wealth. Reinhardt was a man of war. He would win the conflict, but in the wake of a devastating war, the realm did not someone like himself on the throne. The realm needed someone to rebuild it. Of course, as a bastard, Argrave's education might be lacking, but character and will were paramount, by Reinhardt's estimation. Provided the relationship lasted, his choice of partner might prove problematic for realm stability. But then again, Enrico had told Reinhardt that Argrave had some sort of close relationship with the tribe of snow elves, and the woman herself seemed quite keen. Each issue had its counterpoint. With the situation as miserable as it was a wonder anyone like Argrave existed. Above all, no better alternative existed. Margrave Reinhardt found comfort in the fact that the founder of House Vaska, the leader of the Legion of 10,000 Snakes, had been known as deceptive, even dishonorable. But the first Vaska cared about the people, and he built the longest-lasting human kingdom in the known world. Margrave Reinhardt would be happy to replicate even half of that. Reinhardt heard steel clanging up the hallway and refocused back on the doorway. One of his knights entered, breathing a little heavily. "My lord. There's trouble," he said quickly. "Your wyvern." "It's..." The Margrave leaned forward, placing one hand on the table. "What?" "In the skies," the knight finished. Reinhardt's eyes danced for a few seconds, stunned. When he gathered himself, the Margrave stood quickly enough to cast his chair to the ground. He wiped his hands with a cloth, and then stepped around the table. "Stay here with Rose," the Margrave directed, already half running. The Margrave wound through the complex keep of stone that was the Lion's Son castle. The dining hall was near the center of the massive fortress, and so it took a great deal of time to reach the outside. Eventually, the Margrave ran to a balcony overlooked the Lion's Son wall, glancing about the skies. Just as his knight had said, his wyvern was flying about the sky, controlled by a masterful rider. Reinhardt watched for half a second, teeth clenched tightly. The tribal, he finally realized, sprinting away from the balcony. The Margrave ran through his keep until he eventually set foot on the great Lion's Son wall. His men were not undisciplined, and a great many of them had gathered. Though many were mages, they were hesitant to attack the Margrave's personal property. Reinhardt spotted one of his commanders and strutted to him. "How did this happen?" "The men were eating, sir," the commander explained deferentially. "How did the tribal get to where he was?" "Assign guards to them at all times," Reinhardt demanded. "He entered the privy, and then he was there." The commander shook his head, watching the sky. "Some people think he climbed out of the window, along the mountainside." The Margrave glanced around at everyone. "Keep watch for Argrave and the others. Give them no opportunity. This is the only place they can be reasonably picked up. Ensure it is watched," he directed. Just as the Margrave gave that order, the wyvern changed its course in the sky. It headed for the apartments in the central keep. Reinhardt stepped away and entered there, sprinting through the stone hallways while looking out of balconies to follow its movements. Eventually, he burst into Rose's room, which was empty, save Argrave and his companions. The wyvern landed and dug its claws into the wall, holding its neck inside the room. "What in the God's name are you doing?" the Margrave shouted. Behind, Margrave heard some knights pursuing him, ready to aid. Glimmen already stood opposite the Margrave, protecting them as they loaded their things atop the wyvern. Argrave helped Annalise up and cast glances back to the Margrave. "I told you I had to go." "Told you it was urgent," he shouted out. "And this is your solution?" Reinhardt stepped closer. "I'll get your lizard friend back to you by tomorrow." "Probably," Argrave shouted again. Margrave Reinhardt stepped closer, but suddenly, mist in the room coalesced into life like elven warriors. Reinhardt darted backwards, surprised. It gave Argrave enough time to climb back the wyvern himself, and then Gilliman followed shortly after. Argrave's 4 fox-like pets scampered across the room, then jumped up just after him. Just like that, the wyvern pushed off, beating its great wings to gain altitude. The Margrave stepped to the balcony and whistled, but his beast ignored his command. It never had before, so the Margrave stared, shocked by the whole situation. The Margrave stood there, staring, for a long while. Eventually, a voice broke his thoughts. "Margrave," the voice came, finally breaking his focus. "Are you all right?" "The third time," he began, fist clenched, but collected himself. "I'm fine," he waved his hand, cradling his forehead. "We found this in Argrave's room, sir. I don't feel comfortable holding it. Too rich for my blood." The Margrave turned his head, where he received a letter alongside 5 rose gold magic coins. The letter was hastily written, and read, "Payment for horse, wool, and travel fare. Wyvern back by tomorrow. I might choke you if you weren't flying this damn thing," Argrave shouted above the wind. "We're headed that way," he pointed, looking down at the old compass Titus had given him. "Did you see his face?" Duran giggled, then erupted into laughter. "Gods, what a rush!" I climbed out the privy's window. It was about 10 feet up, and then scaled along the damned mountain wall. Clay I've tied to my back. The wyvern was a bit fussy, but I used some of that newfound druidic magic to calm it and ride it into glory. "Absolutely brilliant, I am." "You shouldn't have done it at all," Argrave yelled back. "Good gods, don't yell into my ear." He brushed off Argrave's comments easily. "It worked out, didn't it? We're free, we're out and gone. No one died, not a one. I waited until dinner time so the guard would be occupied. It was a perfect little theft." Argrave mulled that over and cast a glance back at Annalise. "If you had brought it up, discussed it with us, we wouldn't be having this conversation," he admonished. "Say we didn't notice. What was your plan?" "Fly about until we were captured, then fly away into the distance." "I knew you'd notice," he said as though it was obvious. Annalise would catch on to my lies. She'd send her little star sparrow out to find out what I was doing, and then you'd speedily get our things. Duran summarized. "Everything worked as I thought it might. Besides, I only decided to do it after I heard the Margrave pussyfooting about as he was. He clearly wasn't budging. And yet after you left, he did just that." Argrave shouted in irritation, causing Duran to cup his ears once again. He scrambled to grab the reins. "It's done," Duran concluded. "Too late to go back." "We shouldn't have to go back." Argrave shook his head. "And now, I'll never hear whatever it was he was going to say." "Fly, you fool." "This can't be without consequence." Argrave knew at once. "I have to talk with Annalise, work something out. And if that doesn't work, cut your losses, Argrave." The whole experience left a sour taste in his mouth, like the sour experience it was. Argrave watched the landmarks they passed by, leading Duran towards Jast. It wasn't long until the city, with its titanic towers of black stone, came into sight. Argrave did not dare become known as the rider of the wyvern, and so he directed Duran to a secluded portion far removed from civilization before they dismounted. Once it was released from the relatively light hold of Duran's druidic magic, it flew away back towards its home like a carrier pigeon. Though it was a long walk to Jast, and made longer by Argrave's refusal to deviate from his ritual of watching the sun set with Annalise, they made it at around midnight. The same as last time, Argrave didn't plan on using official channels. Argrave got in touch with the same men who had smuggled him in once before. Things went smoothly. "You know smugglers?" Duran questioned as they sat there waiting. "Yeah," Argrave nodded. "Some loose ends that need to be tied up here. Elena Vibbo, I had some business dealings with her. I entrusted her with some enchanted relics, had her appraise them. Moreover, she's the primary point of contact between me and the Vadaimon. Hopefully, I can replace Gilliman's axe." "That's wishful thinking, though." "A lady runs a smuggling ring?" Duran raised a brow. "That's a lady I'd like to meet. Her brother runs this vast criminal enterprise in Jast, actually." "Rivian." Duran looked around. "Hell of a place, Vaska." "So many new things." "So exciting," he said eagerly. "Keep your tattoos hidden, if you would." It was pointless to wear them in the burnt desert because the three of us stuck out enough as was. "But we'll need to don our circlets of disguise once again." Argrave shook his head, then explained to Duran, "They'll muddle the features with illusion magic, keep us away from the public. If not the magic. Unlike the first time they'd entered Jast, they were given VIP smuggling treatment, whatever that's worth. The 4 of them were allowed to keep their things, and instead of being led to an abandoned mansion on the outskirts of Jast, they were led directly into the Vibble estate. Argrave felt like he was moving up in the world. A gruff-looking man looked suitably out of place as he opened a fancy door within the elaborate mansion of silver, dark wood, and marble. Argrave strutted inside first. Perhaps the guards were better directed, or perhaps Argrave was remembered, because his companions were not stopped at the door as they had been on his last visit to the Vibble estate. Argrave had thought leaving the Lionsome Castle might give him some reprieve from red hair, but instead, he saw it once again. This time, in the form of siblings. There might be mistaken for Parbans were their eyes not bright green. Rivian of Vibble sat at the head of the table, as finely dressed and fierce-eyed as ever. Elaine sat slightly ahead and beside him, one leg crossed over the other. She dressed finely, too, unusual, considering she usually wore the simple grey robes of the Order of the Grey Owl. Argrave didn't want to presume why she had done such a thing, but the dress was very flattering on her. "I dislike being woken this late in the night very much." "You?" Elaine paused when her eyes fell on Argrave's face. "You don't look disheveled enough to have been woken up." "And smuggling is a late-night business," Argrave greeted. "Elaine." "Rivian." "Been a while." "I have a new addition." "Duran," he gestured towards the former tribal, who stood there silently with a smile on his face. "Argrave?" Elaine asked, genuinely questioning if it was him. Yes, it's me. Would this help? He covered his eyes with his hand. Rivian placed his arms on the table, ignoring Argrave's change. It is nice to see you again. We took you for dead. Not a word of you for months. Argrave clasped his hands together. Yes, well, if I don't wish to be found, no one will find me, not even the bat. You can tell the bat that, both of you. Elaine uncrossed her legs and shifted in her chair. Annalise scrutinized her expression closely. Rivian gave a smile. I will tell him, he confirmed. Assume you're here to check in on our business? Elaine questioned, leaning forward on the table. Among other things. Argrave nodded. What other things? Rivian inquired curiously. Argrave shrugged. Same reason as many, I suspect. You want some investment advice? People trying to combat disease with magic, that's about to go big, and soon, he snapped. I might get into the biz myself, but I have other things in mind for my money. For starters, paying you. I'd like the same arrangement as last time. For a week, this time. Protection from my men for you, your companions, and your property, while you do business in Just? Rivian sought to confirm, leaning on his elbows resting atop the table. Argrave spread his arms out. Precisely. Saved me the words. Will allow you to stay here, Rivian suggested. Saved me a walk, too. Argrave raised a brow. Maybe I left a better impression than I thought. Elaine placed her pale hands on the table. It will be easier, she posited. We have business, you and I. Chapter 172. When will you learn? There's something you should know, Annalise told Argrave. Argrave set aside his duster, preparing to finally head to sleep. Something wrong? I believe Elaine is cooperating with the bat, too. She felt guilty when you mentioned that name, as though she had informed on you and regretted it, she disclosed seriously. Although the last bit is only my personal conclusion. I cannot say with certainty. Argrave frowned. Not entirely unexpected, but good to know. Argrave nodded. I'll be sure to watch my tongue. You always do, she noted, finally relaxing now that she'd conveyed what she had wanted to. Another thing, Argrave pointed at her. I need your help with something. Annalise raised a brow. Magic advice? Darren advice, Argrave said bitterly, then moved to sit on the bed, removing his shoes. Oh, she took off her own duster, casting it atop his. The Margrave had no intent to release us, Argrave stated plainly. From what I remember of the conversation, he had plans for me. He wanted to introduce me to his vassals. That meant we'd be forced to stay, and with the importance of ending the spread of the plague, that's simply not an option. This was a good outcome, he reflected. But I don't care if everything worked out. Him going off on his own like that, it could cause problems in the future. It can't happen again. At the same time, Argrave shook his head, leaving a question unspoken. Annalise slowly shook her head, then sat down beside Argrave. I think that is reasonable, she reassured him. He needs to be reined in. Argrave nodded decisively now that Annalise agreed with him. He trusted her opinion more than his own. I have to nip this in the bud, especially when dealing with that holy fool Orion. He could get us all killed. I can't abide him continually doing things like this. If I can't predict him, he might not be welcome. Darren's a resourceful bastard, crazy, but smart. He's got brains, balls. If he'd fucking be straight with me, I could use all that, he said quickly, frustrated with the situation. Annalise shrugged. Though I loathe to admit it, I do not know where to begin. I know where to begin, just not how. Argrave turned to her. He doesn't respect me. That's the issue. He thinks more of his own opinion than mine. Maybe there's good reason for that. Annalise shook her head. But even if that is the case, that's not important. Argrave continued. With his personality, we've got a recipe for disaster brewing on the horizon. I have to show him that there are consequences for doing things like that. Have to show him what I say has weight. He won't respond to punishment. That might only exacerbate his disobedience. Annalise turned her head. We just conversed with two people who might help you with that, Elaine and Rivian. Perhaps not entirely honest, staging consequences for his actions. But then, neither are you. Argrave kept his gaze locked with hers, expression slowly brightening as he put together what she said. Then, as he pondered it more, his gaze grew distant. I don't know. That seems like something Titus would do. I want him as an ally and confidant, not as some servant cowed by intimidation and subterfuge. Titus did win, no? She pointed out quietly. Argrave sighed. I'll have to think on it more, but it's better than what I had before. This is why I ask you, he pointed out, wrapping one of his arms around her. She smiled lightly. Another thing, Argrave continued. I want you to stay inside until I get the things that'll help you resist disease better. What? She looked at him. We had this discussion. It serves no purpose. Please. He pleaded earnestly. It won't take very long at all, maybe 2 days. And it would mean a great deal to me. He swallowed, then clarified. It would ease a lot of the worries I have. Annalise stared for a long while, expression inscrutable. Finally, she sighed, then leaned forward and gave him a kiss. All right, she agreed with a whisper. Argrave looked as if relieved of a big burden. Thank you for this. I know you're pretty far from a fragile flower, but I don't want to take any chances. He sighed. If it makes you feel any better, there's something I want you to do. Talk to Darren. Find out what he's interested in doing. I'm sure if I forbid him from doing it, he'll do it anyway. That's what I want. I see you have already made a plan, Annalise noted. Not necessarily, Argrave looked to the door. I just want to keep the option in mind. Feels a bit dirty, frankly, and it might cost me. But having Duran be truly steadfast will be a big boon. And the alternative? I don't want to cut Duran loose. It may come to that, she informed him curtly. Argrave bit his lip. He wanted things to work out. Duran had ever been his favorite character, largely for his reckless nature. He wasn't sure someone like that could fit into the party he'd built thus far. Elias found that calming a crowd using a common enemy was not as immediate a task as he suspected it might be. He spent 5 days and 5 nights on the battlements of Elbrail's castle, largely sleepless, shouting out to the people just outside the gates, urging them to settle things amicably. He ate only bread and soup before them. They threw things, made outlandish demands, and even threatened to kill Elias and those close to him. Despite this, he was unwaveringly kind. Though it seemed he might never be able to get through their outrage, eventually, his endurance outlasted their own and they could shout no longer. Like that, he was able to engage in dialogue with the revolt. He spoke to many people of their misgivings with the Duke, patiently listened to the people and their grievances, and tried to relate to them. At the end of the day, they were all human beings. All he did was talk, yet perhaps that was all the people needed. Eventually, he stepped down from the battlements, and moved to stand directly across from them, just beyond the gate. He befriended many and remembered countless names just as the people came to know him. The people loved House Parban. His reputation aided him in this, just as Stain suggested it might. He promised them things that he had already intended to give them. He promised to root out the corruption in the city and ensure that each and every man would be treated fairly under the law. He promised that the people who had been wronged would be given justice, promised that those people unfairly seized and executed by rogue knights of the dukedom would have their family compensated and receive vengeance against their killers. Yet beneath it all, he wove the narrative that the plague was the common enemy. He drilled that idea into their head ever so slowly and deliberately so that soon enough, the people themselves were suggesting it would be best to focus on the plague and abandon this revolt. Elias never would have been capable of doing such a subtle thing. It was Stain's idea, and he used Elias to implement it. Soon enough, things had pacified enough that Elias dared to open the gates. He was the first to walk among the people. His dialoguing had not been without merit. He'd made friends among the would-be rebels, and they all greeted him without hostility. He could not say it was warm. Their tempers could not be calmed so quickly, he knew, but he finally lifted the siege. After, the true work began. Though the Duke's wife pressured Duke Marorch into remaining within the castle, Elias used his own men to organize proper treatment for all of the plague-ridden within Elbrail. At times he got his hands dirty, setting up tents and overseeing the process of organization. The disease was a virulent and highly contagious thing. Elias was not foolish enough to think that he could conquer it within the day. Even still, by restoring order in the city, the rate at which it spread diminished greatly. Young Lord, with so many infected, the industries within the city have faltered, an old man explained to Elias, who stood in a tent with the plagued. Helmut stood just beside him, guarding him ever diligently. His purple eyes swirled like vortexes, watching each and all before them. Meaning? Elias pressed. The men that own the businesses, textile factories, my lord, or dyeing shops, or butcheries, or any number of enterprises. They refuse to allow people with a disease work in their buildings. No work for those with the waxpox. They say, all of us are idle, my lord. And some people have even resorted to raiding the granaries of the wealthier citizens, for they cannot afford to pay. It is. The man gripped his hands together. His fingers were waxy and distorted. This work block is sensible, my lord, I know it. Yet even still, people begin to starve. Elias considered this, nodding. I will ensure that the merchants do not raise the prices on common food item, under severe penalty, he promised. And I will secure subsidies, even if I need to call upon my father. You may count on that. The old man looked greatly relieved. Elias gave him a curt, if gentle nod, and then walked out of the tent. Things have largely stabilized, Elias reflected to Helmut quietly. I think the plague might have ended the revolt regardless of what I'd done. But even still, it is good to know I have helped curb things, if only slightly. You are your father's son, Helmut reflected. He enjoys helping people, too. Elias smiled when he was compared to his father. Yet now that things have calmed, I should leave this to subordinates. I made promises. I must keep them. The root of most of the corruption in the city is the Duchess. Based on what Stain has found me, I will be of better use in improving the city back in the Duke's castle. Yet how to separate the Duke and the Duchess? I am glad to hear of it, Helmut said, relief on his tone. Young Lord Elias. Elias started his head about from his retainer's panic. Helmut's hand pointed ahead urgently. He quickly placed the pieces and turned to where Helmut pointed. A large, badly hunched man ran towards him with metal held in hand, body wrapped in a heavy burlap cloak. Elias was not foolish enough to go out without guards. His knights moved to intercept, yet 2 more men coordinated with the hunchbacked man, mindlessly tackling his guards. This hunchbacked man broke past his distracted guards with skill. He was no common cutthroat, and that much was obvious at once. Elias pivoted away, yet this seemingly deformed man at once lunged forth with inhuman speed. Helmut conjured a B-rank ward in front of Elias, but it shattered once it met with the man's weapon. Something hurled towards the air at Elias, and he raised his hand to block it. Something cold and wet covered his hand and spilled onto his face. He had no time for disgust because his assailant still approached. He saw a gleaming metal whiteness approach and remembered his father's training well. He caught the man's wrist and kicked his shin. The dagger only barely cut his hand, right where the bulk of the liquid had landed. The man fell from the kick to his shin, and his heavy burlap robe fell off of him. He was badly stricken with the plague, his skin waxy and distorted. The man's wrist twisted as he fell, and the dagger clattered to the ground. Elias recognized it very well. It was his father's. Once the Margrave had lost it fighting Prince Indun at Daruka. Young lord. Helmut paused. The blood. The man Elias had subdued started to laugh. His skin was so badly morphed his eyes were practically sealed shut, and they seemed to gleam with malice. A parting gift for the young lord. Elias looked at his hand finally, realizing what had been thrown at him. It was blackened, diseased blood. Chapter 173, Looping Road. Elaine watched Argrave as he ate his breakfast. It was more than a bit disconcerting, considering she deliberately chose him out of all his party members to stare at. Annalise was feeding her star sparrow, Darren was examining all of the food curiously, and Guilliman sat in silence. Of the three, he certainly didn't picture himself being the most interesting to look at. Elaine had long ago finished her meal, but Argrave still had much and more to eat. Ever since becoming black-blooded, he found his appetite much greater than it was before. Maybe that was just because he exerted himself more. Argrave finally stared back at her, chewing through a soft slice of meat. He examined the black gaseous magic within her, considering it a good exercise to help him distinguish between the different ranks of magic by sight alone. I think you could become A rank any time you want, now, Argrave guessed, hoping to break some of the silence. She shifted in her chair and crossed her arms. And how would you know? Argrave tapped his temple, indicating his eyes. You think I got these lamps because I like the way they look? No, I can see your magic. Very impressive. He lowered his hand and shook his head. He deliberately mentioned this ability, hoping vaguely she might report it to Princess Ilnor. I got what I wanted from the Lowway. And from the burnt desert beyond it. One of his Brumacines jumped up on his lap, gazing at the green-eyed woman across from him. Some of the iciness was dispelled by his conversation, and Elaine looked down at the grey fox on his lap. I hope those creatures of yours made no mess. They never do. Unless I want that to happen. Argrave pointed his fork. So, let's get to brass tacks. How is business? He took another bite as he waited for her answer. Good. You mentioned that I could become an A-rank mage. The issue is, I'm too busy to head to the Tower of the Grey Owl to study the process. She nodded with the faintest of smiles. The Vadaimon are a bit stingy. They're only distributing the lowest-ranked druidic spells. Even still, they sell like nothing else, and I dare not cripple this business in infancy. Ro is a hostile prick, but I very rarely have to see him. At this point, I very nearly make as much gold as my brother. Do they trade any ebb on ice? Argrave got to the matter he cared about most. Elaine shook her head. Don't know what that is. We've only traded spellbooks and books about enchantment. Do they carry black weaponry? Guilliman butted in. Crystalline. Elaine looked at him. Maybe. I seldom go personally anymore. Argrave tapped the table, thinking. Alright. If you can make it happen, I'd like to see some of the Vadaimon smugglers. What for? She frowned. Come on. I set you up with this killer business and asked for nothing in return. Argrave held his hands out. Elaine tapped her finger against her elbow as she sat there with arms crossed. You're right, she agreed after a time. I'll see what I can do, but if you're here a week and no longer, you'll just have to get lucky if you want to meet them. Voyages to Vaiden take a while. Might be they stop by. Might be they don't. Argrave nodded. It was the best he'd be able to get. All right. The enchanted jewelry that I left with you. I certainly hope they're all appraised by now. Elaine nodded. About 2 weeks ago, the last of them came back in. Very valuable stuff. I've got them in our vault. A lot of the appraisers made offers to buy them. I refused, naturally, per our arrangement. Very nice. After I finish up here, I'd like to see them. Argrave tapped his food with his fork. I'll pick out what I plan on using. Everything else, I'd like to leave to you to sell. 75-25 split, my favor. She bit her lip, then bartered. 60-40. Argrave placed his hands on the table. You're shaking me down. It'll be hard to sell them to anyone that doesn't know what they do. I'm in contact with the appraisers, Elaine pointed out. Forget that. Argrave placed his elbows against the table loudly and leaned in. Who did you use as the appraiser? That old man Mucullen on the edge of town, or maybe that Tower Master Quint in the southwestern center of Just? I know who you might have brought this to. I can sell them fine, don't cheat me. 80-20. My favor. He raised it. Elaine stared, biting her lip harder. As she deliberated. 75-25, she brought that figure back. I don't need you for this, and I already paid my service fee for the appraisal a long time ago. Those items are mine. I'm trying to do you a favor, yet you keep slapping my hand away. 85:15. He raised his share once again, voice stern. Elaine tensed up, staring down Argrave. Darren's gaze jumped between the two of them, waiting to see what would happen. Eventually, her tension dissipated and Elaine shook her head. Dealing with you the last time was definitely different. Fine. 85:15. Gods be damned, she said defeatedly. Argrave smiled as though his sternness never was, then resumed eating contentedly. Elaine led Argrave to the Vibel vault where the jewelry was supposedly kept. She insisted that they go alone due to her brother's rules, but Argrave only agreed once Annalise confirmed she held no malicious intent. He thought things might be awkward between them. They had parted on a strange note. Elaine never brought her earlier courtship proposal up. Argrave definitely wouldn't, either. The place was very well guarded by knights and by walls of enchanted steel. The main door was heavy enough to require 2 men to open it, and the vault itself was divided into cells, each with another heavy locked door. The ceiling was low, and Argrave needed to bend his neck to stand straight. After a little run through the maze-like vault, they arrived at one of the cells, and Elaine retrieved a key. The jewels were kept in a simple box per piece, alongside a detailed dissertation on their effects. Argrave spent a fair while sorting through them, determining which ones were useful and which could be sold. What was stopping someone from wearing 10 or more enchanted rings, alongside pounds of enchanted necklaces and bracelets? Nothing. Ostensibly. But there was an issue of resonance. For the ring that Annalise and Argrave wore, it merely contained a spell. One could wear 10 of them without much issue. They were portable spells, in essence. The exorbitant cost was a main barrier. For other enchantments, though, the matter was different. Enchantments made in the distant past, as those Argrave had appraised, affect the body itself. As such, if the enchantments are incompatible, their efficacy would be reduced by an astonishing degree. If one wears a ring that helps its wearer resist fire and a ring that helps them resist ice, the two would combat each other and nullify their effects near completely. By contrast, complementary enchantments might supplement each other. As such, Argrave needed to choose a good set for each of his 3 companions and himself. Glimmin stood to be the frontliner, always. He had amazing hardiness, and his survivability could hardly be improved more. Argrave chose a set of anklets that augmented speed. Speed and power were not different, they were one in the same. Glimmin would always benefit from more speed. They were anklets. But considering how big the man was, he might need to wear them as bracelets. Additionally, Argrave found him a necklace to resist electricity, which Argrave considered the most potent form of elemental magic. The giant killers gave him lightning immunity, but only when held. Beyond that, no other compatible enchantment suited him. Darren would likely fill the space between Gilliman and the 2 mages, Annalise and Argrave. He was capable with his glaive, but also capable with his magic. Versatility was his specialty. Something all-purpose suited him. Argrave chose out any enchantments that helped with his defense. Though his wyvern scale armor was very good, it fell short of what Annalise and Argrave wore. In the end, it amounted to a steel ring that hardened one's skin, coupled with a set of earrings that strengthened the bones. Considering Argrave did not know if Darren would stick around, he didn't plan on giving them to him immediately. As for Annalise, Argrave couldn't deny he wanted to give her mostly defensive enchantments. In the end, he knew it wasn't the right call. He chose a few rings that affected focus and concentration. It would enable her to aim better in battle and ignore distractions easier. She was already a calm person by nature, and he hoped this would capitalize on that strength of hers further yet. On a more personal note, he hoped it might help with some of the more negative aspects of her empathic nature. She seldom complained, but Argrave still felt remorse when he recalled her suffering in the low way of the Rose and the Thungorge Citadel. Lastly, Argrave himself. He stood to be the heavy hitter of the squad, especially with the blessing of supersession. He had hoped for something to augment the strength of any electric spells. Unfortunately, he didn't get lucky. After that, he'd been hoping for something to aid with blood magic. Once again, no such fortune. In the end, he settled on a ring that strengthened his wind magic. It might be useful for dealing with projectiles. The real haul was to be the money he gained from selling all of these. There, Argrave finished, standing up once again with a piece of paper in his hand. He'd recorded everything that was going to be pawned off. Everything left, I leave to you to sell. How do you know I won't cheat you? Elaine looked at the pieces scattered throughout the room. You asked me something similar last time, as I recall. I'll know, Argrave said plainly. I know a lot of things. It might be that I'm the bat. When Argrave knew to look for guilt, he saw it written on her features clearly. It might be I asked you to report about me, because I was curious what you might say. Argrave hazarded a guess based on what Annalise had told him. Elaine's widening eyes indicated that he'd hit the nail on the head. Princess Eleanor had received some information about his actions from Elaine. That meant the princess was aware of him. He supposed it was inevitable, given that he'd used her alias to enter this city a long time ago. Or maybe these prying eyes of mine can read the mind, Argrave said suggestively, dismissing his own words with a smile. Who can say? She was obviously stunned for a moment, but slowly she settled down. I'll get it done, she promised. Argrave clapped, the sound muffled by his gloves. Excellent. Now I can stop playing the hardliner. Elaine looked up at him. You have changed a lot, haven't you?" Argrave frowned. "What does that mean?" "I don't know." She shook her head. "You just seem harsher, less." She trailed off, leaving a word unspoken. Argrave laughed and made for the door. "Saw over the split?" "Come on, I can't be a doormat." "I hope there's no hard feelings. I still consider you and your brother friends, you know." "Never mind. Forget I said anything." She changed the subject, walking ahead of Argrave to exit the cell. Argrave stood in silence, neck bent to avoid bumping his head on the low ceiling. He contemplated her words for a few seconds. After, he stepped forward, mind refocused on getting all that he needed from Just. "By the way, I might need your help with something. It's about this new companion of mine," he called out. Chapter 174, Even the Greatest Fall. The time spent at Just passed in much the same way as their first visit, though without the feeling of tension from the last time. Just was allied to house Parban, now, and the sentiment was reflected in the streets. Flag-saluting patriots abounded, whereas last time had the atmosphere of a heated, tense debate. Parban was well loved and supported by the Count of Just. Yet the plague was an imminent issue. Count Delbrun was managing things in a stern way. Any plagued refugees from the villages were kept outside of the city, and the gates were opened only during specific hours of the day. Even during those hours all entries were heavily guarded, and all entering the city were strictly checked. Though this did not prevent the spread of the plague entirely, it did contain it a great deal. Residents of the city were given medical treatment. Those that could not pay were given free, if limited, medical treatment, and cordoned off in abandoned buildings. Those that could pay could receive highly specialized medical treatment from spellcasters. Entrepreneurial wizards in the Order of the Grey Owl were already developing things to combat the plague. Many of them were utter bogus. Argrave had the good fortune to know which were scams and which weren't. All of these elements working in tandem kept Just quite stable. Argrave bought 20 masks. Their seller dubbed them humorless masks. They were solemn-looking plain white masks that shone with complex enchantments on the inside. When worn, the mask would constantly project clean air infused with healing magic into the airways. Its seller said it would keep out bad humors by ensuring only clean air entered, but despite its dubious description, it was a tremendous boon to the constitution. It was like a constant minor healing agent pumping throughout the body, carried by the lungs and then the blood. He bought 20 for reserve. Each lasted a week when actively used. Though the humorless masks would be quite effective for most purposes, Argrave still bought an abundance of ingredients needed to make potions that would help combat disease. He would be sure to have Annalise and Duran both drink them whenever they were in high-risk areas. Glimmen brewed these potions naturally. While moving through the town, Argrave made it a point to practice using Garm's eyes to discern what rank spellcasters was at. As he practiced more and more, he grew confident in discerning who was what rank, and his own knowledge of certain people helped verify those results. He felt fairly adept at determining a spellcaster's rank now, but naturally, it would need some fine-tuning. Beyond tending to the issue of disease, Argrave also focused on refueling, so to speak. He sold the jewelry and other valuables pillaged from Argent, the Tower of Silver. Between the war and the plague, he did not get as much as he'd liked. Nevertheless, it was a handsome sum. He used that, plus the remainder of what he still had in his lockbox, to pay for everything he needed. Annalise and Argrave had used most of the B-rank wards available in their enchanted rings, so Argrave had them recharged, significantly less expensive than having them made initially, yet still quite costly. Argrave also had their enchanted gear examined and repaired. Between paying back the Margrave, the humorless masks, and the enchantment repairs and recharges, Argrave found himself completely out of rose gold magic coins. When Argrave recognized that, he did quite a lot of introspection. He had received that money from the sale of the estate of Foamspire, which had come from a bribe by Indune. Annalise and Argrave could still spot the tower every day when they did their daily ritual of sunset watching. Argrave checked Rivian's calendar. As he recalled, Foamspire vanished into the ocean overnight on 1/13/873. He prayed he remembered that date. "What are you grinning about?" Argrave questioned as he ate breakfast with Duran and Annalise. "What, the man with the magic eyes can't catch on?" Duran tapped his fork against the plate, then leaned back in his chair. "It seems you and I are on the same level." Argrave double-took for a moment, then set down his fork, scrutinizing Duran a little more carefully. The man had always possessed a large supply of magic, well over many C-rank mages. Yet Duran yet to breach the barrier, lacking any C-rank spells to learn. "Your C-rank, now," Argrave said, catching on. Duran beamed. "Couple of weeks with Garm's books, I finally break this little limit I've had for near a year. Wondrous thing, isn't it? It seems we're together now and being midway to the end of the road to mastery of magic." He picked up his fork again. Argrave wiped his face off with a napkin as he stared Duran down. He didn't say anything. "That thing I mentioned to you," Argrave turned to look at Elaine. "You took care of it?" Elaine nodded. "Make sure they were all delivered," Argrave insisted. Duran sat in his bedroom, sitting on his bed with his back to the wall. Argrave had extended their stay here, for reasons Duran couldn't guess. One knee supported a spellbook which projected a three-dimensional spell matrix. He studied it, head tilted to one side. As he did so, a knock came at his door. "It's open," he called out, only moving his head. Argrave opened the door and entered, lowering his head beneath the door frame to enter. He was a very physically imposing person, an effect that had only increased as they traveled. Black blood was doing wonders for him. Evidently, Darren had come to know as they traveled that he was not quite so fearsome. Despite everything, he was still as mortal and fallible as anyone. He just knew a lot of things that he shouldn't. Leader man, what brings you here? Darren greeted. Argrave clasped his hands together. Want to ride a horse? Darren frowned. Why? Want to show you something? He shrugged, stepping closer. And horse riding is fun. Darren closed the book. Why not? I love a good mystery. You'll have to teach me how to ride. Of course. Argrave nodded. You know, I learned from Margrave Reinhardt. Quite a tale. Hash. And all the horses went wild, Argrave said, hands held over the fire. The knights roamed about, trying to rein them in. Meanwhile, I cut my ropes, snuck over to the Margrave's horse, and took her off into the night. Darren broke into a loud, howling laughter that echoed across the plains. It rebounded off a distant white tower on a cliff overlooking the sea. After that, I rode through the whole night. Then I sold the guy's horse to some horse merchant I knew. Could have bought a damn house with what I got. Argrave held up his hand in an okay sign. Darren's laughter was stoked by Argrave's continuation, and he fell on his back, where the two horses they'd rode in on stood behind them, grazing. Gods above, Darren sighed. Thought I was so special, but I was just carrying out a tradition. Argrave chuckled, then handed a skin with a lid on it over to Darren. You want? What's this? Darren eyed it. Wine. Expensive, I'm told. Argrave moved it, and liquid sloshed within. Might have stolen it from Elaine. Darren grabbed it. You had wine this whole time? You greedy. He trailed off as he threw the wineskin back, drinking heavily. I didn't touch it, Argrave protested. I can't get drunk anymore. Now it's just terrible tasting juice to me. Darren frowned. Because you're black-blooded? When Argrave nodded, he shook his head. What a blow. Better than getting sick every damned month. Abject misery. Argrave disagreed. The word misery seemed to remind Darren of something, because he quieted down. He took another drink, staring at the moonlight reflect off the white tower ahead. It was a grandiose piece of architecture. It seemed sturdy, made for the ages. Do you still think about Garm? Darren questioned. Argrave nodded, saying nothing. Darren laid on his back. I've got nightmares of a blue-eyed brick. Blue-eyed. Argrave turned, saw what he really looked like when we fought, Darren explained. Oh. The fight between souls. That must have been wild, he said ponderously. Necromancer like that surely has some imagination. Argrave nodded, turning back to look at the tower. Darren looked surprised Argrave knew about it, but he turned his head to the fire. Always the same dream. We're on a field of black roses. He asks me a question. He says, when you think of freedom, do you think of flying? Darren shook his head. Then the roses become hands. They pull me apart. Or they try, at least. I always struggle. Then, he asks me another question. Different, this time. Darren looked at Argrave. When you think of freedom, do you dream of dying? It rhymes, Argrave noted quietly. Darren drank deeply this time. It's like the guy's still there, tearing me apart, trying to take what he wants. Argrave shook his head. Not possible. He looked at Darren, but his assurances didn't seem comfort the man. He continued, I've got nightmares, too. Sometimes Garm is in them, sure. Mostly it's everything else. Argrave turned. I told you I have a lot of good stories. Fact is, they're fun to talk about. But they were hell to experience. The Cavern of the Lily's death, the Vadaimon invasion, the Low Way of the Rose. Darren stared at Argrave's back, then took another drink from his wineskin. Gotten better with Annalise. She wakes me up when I start muttering, stuff like that. And I do the same for her. I never thought she might be going through the same thing, he said wondrously. Ugh, Darren exclaimed knowingly. Nothing quite like a bedmate. He drank more of the wine. That lady, Elaine. She was a pretty one. Smart, too, and fiery. Exactly the type I like. Wanted to have a chance to chat with her alone, but she was too damn busy. Argrave whipped his head back. Was that why you stayed inside like a good boy? Darren smiled. Now's hardly the time, anyway. Argrave shook his head disapprovingly. Yeah, you're one to talk, Darren said bitterly. My father always told me the gods love me more than anyone. But no gods love a man like a woman can. And you're set. Argrave said nothing more on the matter, and Darren took another drink out of the wineskin, turning to look at the tower. So, let's hear another story, Darren urged. The Cavern of the Lily's death. Let's start there. You say you've got so many stories, after all. Just then, the ground rumbled. The fire flickered ahead of them. Argrave shifted, and then rose to his feet. He stepped ahead, then turned around. The rumbling began to intensify. Though Darren had been staring at Argrave, he saw movement out of the corner of his eye. He turned to look at the white tower in the distance. Darren rose to his feet. He realized that the tower was lowering. He furrowed his brows, perplexed, and stepped forward. Suddenly, great stretches of the land ahead began to distort. It was not so much a catastrophic shaking as it was a simple collapse, a landslide on a grand scale. The grass-strewn sea arch ahead started to depress in the center, great chunks of stone and dirt falling off into the sea. It gained momentum. As some fell, more joined it. A colossal amount of land suddenly fell away, making the sturdy tower and its accompanying walls seem like nothing more than pretty stone as they fell. The tower bent inwards, crashing into the land, which triggered yet more activity. Darren stepped back, briefly afraid. Miles and miles of land ahead collapsed into the ocean. All of the center of the sea arch fell into the water, creating a colossal mass of water and dust exploding upwards into the air. Once things began to settle, Darren calmed, stepping closer. Just then, the pillar of the sea arch began to turn, splitting at the center. It, too, fell, causing another massive splash of water and debris. Darren watched, mouth agape and awed. Argrave had stared at him the entire time, and Darren's gaze slowly moved to him. "Told you I had something to show you," Argrave said, stepping forward. He put his large, bony hand on Darren's shoulder and squeezed tightly. "Let me tell you a story. That bit of land up there, I used to own it. I sold it for an exorbitant sum, because I knew this would happen. I had Elaine send each of the servants living there a letter." Argrave looked to the rubble. "I told them this collapse was coming, gave them all the evidence. Some of them believed me. The others, well, I assume they're dead." Argrave neglected to inform Darren that none had disbelieved the letters, and the tower was truly empty. Argrave leaned in close to Darren's face. "They didn't listen to me, and they died. They thought they knew better. The things I say, Darren, they usually come true." Darren stared Argrave in the eyes, more than a little unnerved. "I have a lot of stories. We'll make a lot more, and they're only going to get more and more noteworthy." Argrave squeezed tighter. "So, if you want to have fun, and you want to do crazy stuff, just wait. It'll happen." He smiled genially. "But I don't need you doing things like what you did at the Lionsome Castle. It throws things off. If I tell you to wait because it's smart, well." Argrave turned back to the site of the collapse. "You should wait." Darren slowly nodded. "Structure, leadership. These things are very important for precise operations. Even if you see what you consider a better way, going off alone only causes trouble for everyone else." Argrave released his grip, then pinched Darren's cheek. "I don't like dealing with uncertainty, imprecision. We're fighting a god. There is very little room for error." Argrave stepped away. "Can you handle that?" Darren lowered his gaze, staying silent. Eventually, he lifted his head up. "Yes, Argrave." "I need more than a yes," he pressed. Darren blinked, then locked his golden eyes with Argrave. "I won't go off on my own, and I won't disobey you." Argrave smiled. He gave Darren 2 light, friendly slaps on the cheek. "Let's ride back. Early day tomorrow." Chapter 175, Into the Plagued Lands. Glimmen stood on the docks of the seedy underground smuggler's cove with Argrave, watching the slightly turbulent waters. Elaine had told them that the Veydaman were going to be coming by today. Argrave hoped to pick up some airborne ice here. Considering Just was a city of magic, it stood to reason the smugglers that come here would bring some for protection. Argrave had taken some extra days to do the little display with Darren. He didn't like idling about for too long, but he felt this matter was important. It came with a bright side. They managed to catch one of the Veydaman smugglers' arrival times. "I'm really glad I remembered the date of the collapse right," Argrave confided with Gilliman. "The whole thing could have gone extremely sour. Could have taken the guy out drinking, wasted time telling stupid stories. I always thought I had a bad memory. I guess I was very wrong. I just hope it works." Argrave kicked the tip of his boots against the ground. "He'll be reliable." Gilliman nodded. Argrave turned his head. "You think?" "Had soldiers like him once." Gilliman crossed his arms. "Capable, but individualistic. Punishing turns them into troublemakers." His teeth showed in the faintest of smiles. "Develop rapport. Show your own capability. That's the path to respect." Argrave looked to Gilliman, feeling a bit more confident now that he'd weighed in. He appreciated Annalise and Gilliman much more now that he'd dealt with a third-party member who was not so compliant. Someday, he'd like to do something to show his appreciation. "A thanks is a nice place to start," Argrave mused. As he opened his mouth, Gilliman shifted. "Boat," he said, tone low. "Big. 8 on it." "A galley, probably, and rowed." Argrave dismissed his thoughts and focused on the matter at hand. Though it was not even in vision, that soon changed. First, Argrave saw the disturbed water, and then a galley came into view, just as Gilliman had said. It was painted for night travel, barely visible against the black sky marking the horizon. Soon enough, it rode into view of the lights within the smuggler's cove. The giant paddles sticking out of its side were retracted, pulled into the boat, and it slowly drifted. A dockworker, one of Elaine's men, moved to receive the boat. Argrave and Gilliman moved towards where it was slated to harbor. The lookout of the boat spotted Gilliman and Argrave, and her eyes stayed on them curiously. Soon enough, the boat was docked, tied by a thick, hearty rope. One of Elaine's men came on and explained the situation. Argrave could barely hear his name, but perhaps it was his imagination. Once the situation was explained, the lookout of the Veydaman stepped off her boat onto the docks and moved towards Gilliman and Argrave speedily. Gilliman tensed, Fearing what was about to happen, Argrave remained relaxed. The Vadaimon soon stood before them. Guilliman the Great? The woman lookout asked, standing before him cautiously. She had a certain cheery intensity to her. The effect doubled by her bright blonde hair. Once, he confirmed tensely, by Vade. She exclaimed, putting her hand to her mouth. I cannot believe it. I never thought. She shook her head wildly, like she was meeting a celebrity of some kind. My brother was an officer beneath you. Turn. Do you remember him? Guilliman put one hand on the pommel of the giant killer's at his belt. Gold of hair, missing a ring finger? I do remember. A good man, he said cautiously. Aye, that's him. She smiled excitedly. I cannot wait to tell him of this. Guilliman spared a glance at Argrave, perplexed. He only returned with a smile, amused at his friend's bewilderment. Argrave knew well that Guilliman was still revered by the Vadaimon, despite both his vampirism and his exile. He was not welcome in Vaiden, true enough, but the people still loved him fiercely. Then this. The lookout continued, turning her gaze to Argrave. You must be the first finger of the hand reaching from the abyss. First finger? What? Argrave asked loudly, taken aback. You were the first human to set foot on Vaiden, spurred by the god of knowledge himself, she explained. Well. Argrave adjusted his collar. That's right, I am. He took his credit, feeling a bit proud. They call you a mad fool, fighting alone against the calamity, she continued, causing Argrave's pride to stop where it started. Argrave clicked his tongue. Hardly alone. But yes, I have that great misfortune. He shook his head. Not why we're here, though. We were curious if you would be willing to part with some ebb on ice. Ebb on ice? She looked between the two of them. I hope you're not asking me to explain what that is, Argrave said drolly. No, it's, she paused, her cheeriness dulled none by his dry comment. Rose instructions. Come now. Guilliman had ebb on ice. He's been using it responsibly. An unfortunate happening made it lost to us. This is for Guilliman, not for me. An axe, preferably, or whatever you have on hand. Argrave held his hands out, assuring the woman. She looked up at Guilliman. I'll see what I can get from the ship, she concluded. N0vlisp.c0m. Guilliman watched as she walked away. Argrave watched him. A little shaken, he looked at Argrave. They should hate me, he said quietly, almost weakly. Should they? Argrave questioned. Yes, he said resolutely. I am an abomination before Vade's eyes. Didn't you deliver gold to your wife for decades? You had to know you had friends. I had one steadfast friend, a fellow heretic, in truth, though guilty of lesser crimes than me. Guilliman nodded. But everyone, they must hate me. It is only right. I betrayed Vade. Argrave shook his head. Everyone knows your circumstances. Everyone knows your tragedy. Even your wife. Everyone respects her, treats her well, because of you. Guilliman closed his eyes and took a long breath. I told you that you'd see them again one day. I wasn't just saying things. I can cure you, Guilliman. No, that's not all. I will, he vowed. Considering all the ridiculously crazy stuff you've done for me, it's the least I can do. And then, you'll go back to Vade. Everyone will welcome you with open arms. You'll meet your wife again, you'll meet your son. Maybe I'll be there, he shrugged. Maybe we'll have tea. Could be fun. Guilliman adjusted his helmet. Maybe, he conceded. Would she? Guilliman trailed off. Argrave didn't know what he was going to say, but he could tell there was some weight to it. Argrave patted him on the shoulder. In the distance, the lookout stepped out of the galley's deck, holding a black axe in her hand. Argrave smiled. Their last day in Just was quite fruitful. Argrave and Annalise travelled together into the Order of the Grey Owl to deposit some of the spell books they had finished. She was allowed entry with her badge denoting her as an honorary wizard of the Grey Owl. Argrave could carry more than a few books this time. They made a night-catching pair, Argrave suspected, but they were unbothered. Doubtless anyone interested would know Argrave had been in Just. Unfortunately, an unavoidable tragedy. Argrave had broadened his mastery of C-rank spells. There were few spells of the rank left to learn that he considered vital. He felt that he would be ready to tackle B rank after they dealt with the plague, and Annalise agreed with that assessment. His magic pool grew every day with his diligent practice, though without the debt of the blessing of supersession, slower than he'd like. That would be remedied in time. On Annalise's end, her talent made itself abundantly known. Argrave had counted. She learned 17 B-rank spells thus far. It was a ridiculous rate of progression. For instance, she learned the druidic spell, Progenitor, binding the 3 spellcasters in the team in a magical network. Annalise benefited the most, gaining a sort of awareness regarding the two of them and their druidic bonds, but Argrave and Andrin would notice if anyone was disconnected from the spell. Considering that typically happened if someone died, Argrave never cared to experience it. Beyond that, she added potent B-rank elemental spells to her arsenal, coupled with helpful illusion magic and potent healing spells. After lightening their load of many books, Argrave and his company left early in the morning. Their pocket was a hell of a lot heavier after the cash from Elaine's sale came in. Maybe his comment about being the bat had gotten under her skin, because she was very deliberate in making it known that he had received the full amount. He doubted that claiming to be the bat would have significant consequences. The visit was still a net loss in terms of pure capital. That was fine, naturally. Argrave felt well prepared for the plague, and money was no object compared to safety. The humorless masks would negate the worst of things, the potions would further eliminate risk. And should someone genuinely grow infected, Glimmin was here. His vampiric blood was Argrave's last resort. The only person who knew that, though, was Annalise. With everything coming together, they finally began heading towards the northwest. Considering that tensions were high and roadblocks were in effect all over the south, they could not travel by carriage as they had before. They traveled by horseback and kept off the main roads. It had been ridiculously challenging to find good mounts. Forests were abundant in the southern territories, and those masked their movements well. Between the compass and the eye-catching landmarks in Vaska, Argrave was confident he was leading his party in the right direction. Gilliman, who had been a mercenary in Vaska for a little over a decade, contributed, too. Their party grew ever closer to the heart of the ravaging plague. And Orion, the Holy Fool. Chapter 176, The Northwest. The air grew colder as they moved further north. For Annalise, Gilliman, it was no issue. Indeed, it may have been some respite. Argrave was largely unbothered. After the experience in becoming black-blooded, it was easy to overlook minor annoyances. Darren, though, who'd spent his whole life in a desert, suffered all throughout the journey, and requested more blankets at night. Argrave's Bromesinas, desert creatures that they were, sought refuge in Argrave's warmth during the night. At daytime, they scouted when they rode. Annalise bound all the spellcasters in the party with the druidic spell, Progenitor. It decreased the maximum magic that she had, but it remained constantly active without expenditure. Anything Argrave's druidic bonds informed him of, she would know if it, too. Like this, she became the perfect advance scout, all while remaining in the safety of the party. They had to sidestep roaming horsemen many times. They might not be dangerous, but considering it was avoidable, they took no chances. Despite these factors, they made steady progress. As they strayed further from the temperate south, they started to see snow. It was thin at first, but soon it blanketed the barren hibernating trees of the forests they traversed. They had chosen to travel on horseback to better conceal their movements, but it made the journey more than a little difficult. Without 3 spellcasters enabling a little recklessness, the journey would not have been as simple. Though they struggled, after about a week and a half, they came into the midwest portion of Vaska, the county of Vedden. Though not as grand as the mercantile city of Matoth, Vedden was rich. The city had walls perhaps 20 feet tall, painted white by snowfall. A fortress stood strong at the top of the hill, separate from but overlooking the city. It was the seat of Elgar, the Count of Vedden. Several rivers passed through the area, making farmland abundant. Vedden's fields were empty during the winter and blanketed with thin sheets of snow, or rather, the unoccupied fields were snow-covered. The plague brought with it refugees from the rural villages of the Midwest, seeking the aid of the Count of Vedden. Argrave had been preparing himself to see chaos, but things were better organized than he thought. Instead of being barred from the walls, the people had been divided into orderly camps in the harvested fields, watched over by the city's guards and knights. There seemed to be no efforts to aid, but the refugee crisis was certainly maintained. In Heroes of Berenda, the chaos had disrupted many of Vedden's vital operations. To see it halted here by efficient handling was a welcome, if perplexing, thing. "We stopping here?" questioned Darren, rubbing the back of his horse's head. Even without druidic magic, the man had a natural affinity with animals. He wore the humorless mask just as Annalise did. Argrave watched the camps, gazed distant. "No reason to. We have food enough to make the rest of the journey, and Gilliman is an able hunter even if we run out." Darren cursed, but Argrave was too distracted to pay him any heed. Argrave pulled on his horse's reins, then said to the rest of his party, "Wait here. I want to go check something out." "No more than 2 minutes," he directed, then led his horse away without waiting for a response. He rode near the camps for refugees, not entering them properly. The tents were filled with the disease-ridden and seemed to be given only simple mats or straw. People eyed him cautiously, and eventually, Argrave found what he was looking for, a household knight, bearing a white hair across his breastplate. That hair was the symbol of House Vedden. He rode up to the man. "Hail," Argrave called out, drawing his horse to a stop. "These are camps for the refugees?" he questioned. "Aye, sir, they are," the man confirmed, voice echoey from beneath his helmet. "Best keep your distance." "Dangerous, they are. The plague rots away a man's everything." "The waxpox, they call it." Argrave shifted. The disease had been given its official name already. The waxpox. Argrave wasn't sure if it could be classified as such. The waxy skin seen in the disease might not qualify as a pox, but the name matched with what it had been called in the game. He focused back on the matter at hand, following up, "And the Count of Vedden ordered this?" That would be the natural order of things." "Sir," the knight finished respectfully. Argrave presumed it was the horse that lent the knight that polite attitude. Not many could afford horses in this day and age. Argrave looked around once again. "But I know Count Elgar. I don't think this is something he would do without counsel. Can you tell me anything else about these camps?" Argrave fished into his pocket and pulled free a gold coin, holding it up to the sun. "Well." The knight trailed off, the shine of the coin making him work his head. "People say it's because of one of his children's advice." "This one," she returned from an academy of sorts, head brimming with ideas. "She's the one to suggest it, sir, to the best of my knowledge. Does the name Mina of Veden jog your memory?" Argrave followed up. "That's it, sir." The knight nodded, helmet clanging against his breastplate. "Then that's all from me." Catch. Argrave flicked the coin and then rode away, lost in thought. "She shouldn't be here. Mina should be at Maydeth, with Nicoletta," Argrave reasoned. "And even if she were, Mina was never the sort to order something like this built." What's changed? He was curious, and somewhat apprehensive, about the answers to that question. He rejoined his group of 3. His companions had questions written on their face. It was nothing important. Argrave shook his head. It did nothing to think on this, thought it might be he'd ruined something. The plague still took his priority. 2 more days, I'm certain, till we make it to where I don't want to be. Let's ride. There are problems to be fixed. What sort of geography might one associate with disease? Tropical forests. Surely, those places had strange parasites, infectious bacteria, all the works. The continent of Berenda had sprawling jungles, to be sure, but that wasn't the place they were heading to. No, the northwest of Vaska was wetlands. Argrave wasn't sure if it was a bog, a swamp, or a marsh, frankly. He didn't know the difference, but it was wetlands, a little Florida hellscape, though half as hot and 100-fold deadlier. The whole of the northwest had a fittingly gloomy air. Cold fog blanketed the landscapes and obscured visibility, and rising waters submerged much of the road, especially during winter. Overnight, the water would freeze at the surface, barely thawing out by midday. It became difficult to travel by horseback. The horses would either have trouble with their hooves in the water or slip on the thin layers of ice frozen over the road. Still, it was better than being on foot. After the 2 vulnerable people of the group drank a potion to enhance their constitution, they pressed into the heartlands of this desolate place. Annalise scouted out ahead, spotting a vast camp formed around a ruined castle in the marsh. They headed for that. It matched with Argrave's memory of where Orion would be. He dreaded the meeting. The environment did little to abate his dread. The dead lined the marsh. Argrave had seen many corpses in the months he'd been here. Some of them he had made. These corpses were still unsettling, though, even though he knew what to expect. Wherever the plague touched never decayed. Some of them were half-rotten. The waxy, warped flesh marking one as plague-ridden persisted undecayed while the rest of their body rotted, succumbing to death. Though insects were plentiful, the plague-ridden corpses went untouched, like monuments to the disease laid throughout the road, blanketed in low-lying cold fog. They passed by abandoned villages. Some of them had been left for so long the wetlands had already begun to reclaim them. Houses were caved in, granaries were broken and raided by rats, and fields were left unharvested, claimed by the elements and winter. The trees, hibernating for winter, painted a very grim image. The entire northwest told a grave tale. It was even in the air, that constant smell of death. It was a meaty, savory smell, reminding Argrave of uncooked veal. Bizarrely enough, as they headed ever nearer towards the abandoned fortress, he got the distinct feeling that his listeners had noticed something. He was used to this feeling. It warranted further investigation. Nearly in sync, he and Annalise said, "Wait." Annalise locked eyes with Argrave, and he gave her a nod. She closed her eyes, holding her hand near the star sparrow at her shoulder. A spell matrix whirled about in her hand, dissipating into green light. The bird vanished from her shoulder, and Argrave watched her patiently, keeping his horse at heel. "I see. Footman, they bear golden armor," she said. "Enchanted," and heavily. Argrave took a deep breath. "Orion's royal guard." They traverse the wetlands ably, Annalise continued. "They travel the road." "Should we fear off course?" Duran shook his head, silently expressing his displeasure at the idea of going off-road in this terrain. "No," Argrave said, and Duran lifted his head with his golden eyes a bit brighter. "We have to deal with them sooner or later, best to talk to them now, be escorted to Orion by them, personally." Argrave clenched the reins of his horse tighter. "Like servant, like master, I suspect these men will be as demented as Orion himself. These are armed men. Dangerous." He locked eyes with Duran. "I got the message, Argrave." He held up his hands to profess innocence. "I live like the dead." Argrave lifted his head. Duran had stopped choosing the term leader man since that display at Foamspire, he found. He supposed it had been undermining the entire time. "Let's go." Then, Argrave spurred his horse onwards. He and Gilliman led with Duran and Annalise traveling just behind. Argrave cast a druidic spell. After a couple minutes of travel, Argrave's mercenaries returned to him, ready to aid in case he needed it. More minutes after, something golden sheened between the trees. As soon as Argrave saw it, he directed his party to stop, waiting passively in the center of the road. Orion's knights walked into view. They bore the golden armor of the royal guard, undefaced by the harshness of the wetlands. Their armor gleamed like the sun even still. Their leader had removed his helmet. His face was wrapped in loose white dirty bandages, strands of which swayed in the light winds. The others, too, had bandages on them, some of it stuck out from the armor, waving like a flag in the wind. What little flesh of theirs was exposed was waxy. They didn't seem sick, though. They were full of vigor and power, every step of theirs seeming to shake the earth. Gilliman took a deep breath. As they grew closer, uneased, Orion's wax knights, The game had dubbed them. They were not merely royal guards. They were his own personal order of knights by this point, morphed by the plague and his blessings into something horrifyingly strong and possessed of a devoutness not a bit inferior to his own. He served the gods, and these wax knights, they served him. Argrave spurred his horse a bit forwards, ready to tackle his most important challenge yet. "Hail, traveler," the leading knight said, stopping them. "If you've come here after ignoring the stacked corpses, writhing with waxpox even in death, you must have a purpose." "I do," Argrave nodded. "I've come to see my brother. It's clear to me he needs help, despite his abundant capability. I'm told Prince Orion is ahead, tending to the plagued." Chapter 177, The Holy Fool. "I've come to see my brother. It's clear to me he needs help, despite his abundant capability. I'm told Prince Orion is ahead, tending to the plagued." Argrave spoke to the wax knight before him, staring at the man's dead eyes barely visible behind his bandages. "Do you mean to say Our Holiness is your brother?" the leading knight demanded, taking a step forward. "Half-brother." Argrave removed his hands from his horse's reins, holding his palms out. "But a brother nonetheless." The loose bandages wrapped around the leading wax knight's face slacked, blocking his vision, and he corrected it while pulling it tight. "Prince in June?" one at the side questioned. Argrave shook his head. "No prince at all, elsewise I might have an escort gleaming as you knights do." Argrave, then, "The bastard," the leading knight said. "All are equal before the god's eyes." "That's what Orion says, at least." He smiled warmly, diffusing the situation. The wax knights sized Argrave up, then glanced back towards his companions, examining them in turn. "For your own sake. The waxpox abounds here," their helmetless leader informed him. "We will take you to Orion if you wish it to be so, but even Our Holiness struggles to combat the disease, and more refugees show up daily." "I have an idea of how bad things really are." Argrave turned his head, looking through the trees from whence they'd come. "Things get worse beyond these wetlands every day. Not all refugees had the good fortune to be tended to by my brother. And that's precisely why I came here, to help him, and to help those that suffer," he said seriously. "Then we will take you," the knight gestured. "Orion accepts all comers. Whether you are truly his brother, that will be for him to judge." Argrave nodded. "My companions and I will follow you." With this, Argrave rode back and rejoined his party. At once, he directed Annalise and Dran, "Drink your super juice. You too. I know you drank it this morning, but this is the Heartlands. Disease flows through this place like blood through the heart." Annalise obeyed without complaint, removing her backpack from her shoulders and fishing within to fetch the drink. She took off the white, solemn humorless mask covering her face, and imbibed the liquid, wincing from its bitterness. Dran cursed too quietly to be heard, and then drank as well, washing it down with some conjured water. "Let's go," said Dran, voice tight from his grimace. Annalise nodded, then put the mask back over her face. The wax knights led them through the northwest, though it was less leading and more so resuming the path they had already been taking. With 3 of these knights acting as ostensible escorts, Argrave was not worried about anything coming to kill them, so he kept his brimsters close. Argrave could not say with confidence that Gilliman was these knights' superior in combat. They were some of the most dangerous warriors on the continent at this stage, exceeding the royal knights they branched from by a large margin. Annalise watched them curiously, eyeing the exposed parts of their flesh where one might glimpse the warped, waxy skin. Argrave had long ago described these knights' capabilities to his party. Their entire body was affected by the waxpox. This made them immune to pain, and their skin was near as hard as stone. In addition, Orion had blessed them. They ignored all of the disease's negative aspects barring the change in appearance. Obviously, Annalise's curiosity was not satisfied, but with the knights so close in proximity she had tact enough to avoid asking shameless questions. Dran looked discomforted with the knights, transfixed with an expression of horror and disgust. Both Gilliman watched them as though they were dangerous. It took no more than 30 minutes for the abandoned fortress, occupied by Orion and his gigantic camp of refugees, to come into sight. The wetlands of the northwest were tenacious and aggressive, and much of the fortress had been torn asunder by growth. Trees, roots, fungi, and vines all consumed the grey stone. People lay in tents en masse. Despite the seclusion of this place, the vast majority of these people seemed better fed and better treated than those Argrave witnessed in Veden. The knights led them past all of that, heading for a keep in the corner of the fortress. Once at the door, the knights directed them to a makeshift stable that they'd been using, and Argrave left his horse there without complaint. Dran seemed hesitant to leave his mount there, and his eyes glanced from side to side as though paranoid, watching each and all the disease-ridden inhabitants like coiled rattlesnakes. The wax knights took measured and disciplined steps into the keep where more of their colleagues abounded, guarding the man that lay within. Orion received a vast host of the common people, standing 1.5 feet above most. Orion wore dark plate armor, nearly black, but it was covered by a loose-fitting white toga. His black hair was all bound into a thick braid that descended to his knees. His eyes were grey, with thick and bushy black brows giving him a fierce gaze that might remind most of a stern, if loving, Father. He grew an unruly beard that was still sharp despite its wildness. Argrave waited in the back while the wax knights went ahead to speak to Orion. They spoke to him, and then pointed. Orion looked at him. He pushed past the crowd, coming to stand a fair distance away from Argrave. Argrave was nervous, recalling every experience he'd had with this man in Heroes of Berenda all at once. A great deal of them ended poorly. Even still, Argrave held his arms out and said, "I came to help." Orion took long, rapid strides towards him, each step seeming to shake the earth. His presence was intense. He outsized even Guilliman, and he hurtled towards Argrave like a bull. Despite himself, he took a step back. Guilliman looked ready to advance, but Argrave stopped him. Prince Orion tackled Argrave, lifting him up into the air. His chest screamed out in protest as he squeezed Argrave tight, embracing him. Argrave felt that he'd grown a lot the past month, but now he was being treated like a small child. After a moment of rib-crunching embrace that very nearly triggered his armor's protective enchantments, Orion put him back on his feet and stepped back, holding both hands to Argrave's face. "Brother, look at you," he said, laughing heartily. "Dan, strong, hardy." He gripped Argrave's shoulders as though feeling his muscles, and then laughed again. "And your eyes?" He paused, all of his mirth disappearing at once. Argrave tried not to show his fear in wake of the volatile shift. "Gold inside, black without." "Much like our house colors." He turned, pulling Argrave forward effortlessly. "Everyone," he shouted. "This is my brother, come to help." Argrave was met by exultation he'd not been expecting to receive. Orion heralded him proudly before the crowd. Even despite their sickness, they mustered cheers. Orion's wax knights changed their disposition entirely. "I never expected you to come here from that tower of old owls. You were mired in misery last I saw you. Now your back is straight, your gait is steady, and your will," he whispered into Argrave's ear, barely audible above the cheer of the crowd. "I see light in you, now." "Gold amidst the dark, like Vasca's heraldry. And your eyes, your strange eyes, that vex the voices." He pulled away, wiping his face free of tears. "Family. We unite in despair. Three of us, all the stronger by bound blood." He looked around. 10-0 Just then, someone else stepped out. They stood above the crowd, too, another dark-haired figure. It took Argrave not seconds to identify the man. Prince Magnus was tall like all of the Vascas, though he was the shortest of all Savilnor, standing at 6.5 feet. He stood eye to eye with Annalise. He dressed more like a prominent mercenary than a prince and had a lithe, tightly muscled build to match. His armor was light and scarce at the joints to enable free movement. None of it was especially grandiose. Indeed, the only thing identifying him as a royal was a patch of silken cloth hanging from his belt bearing the Vasca heraldry, twin golden snakes coiled around a sword on a black field. He had dark, small grey eyes that made him seem tired and angry. All his features were angular and sharp, lending him a suffocating, almost unapproachable atmosphere. His medium-length black hair was lighter color than most in the family and kept bound in a short ponytail. Magnus of Vasca walked forward, heading for Orion and Argrave. Prince Indune spared a glance back at the city of Elbrail from atop horseback, flanked by his royal knights. They wore unmarked grey steel, covered by heavy burlap robes. "Not what I had intended. But it's foolish to hold on to something once it's rotted. Nothing more than fighting for fighting's own sake. If we stayed the longer," Indune gave commentary to his knights, though none of them answered. "At the very least, my parting gift was well received." "Such a shame to lose such a nice dagger," he noted, hand gliding near where he had once kept it on his belt. "The South. It succumbs to the plague. Much more deadly than indeed, than perhaps anyone anticipated. Ilnor thinks it was spread. I don't need to know what she thinks," he shouted, causing his horse to shift uneasily. "Do you think I'm ignorant of the world around me, that I cannot come to my own conclusions? My father did this, he must have." Indune calmed himself, taking deep breaths. "I have little doubt Ilnor will intend to use this as a wedge against my father. That he's done something like this, it'll be his downfall, I'm sure of it. So many things are moving against him." He shook his head. "But Ilnor, Felipe, everyone save Ryan, perhaps, that holy fool, barricading himself in the northwest. Everyone underestimates the severity of this plague." The prince stared out across Elbrail, then ran one hand through his long black hair. "It's time for us to move. Time for us to abandon this long venture, painful though it might be to return with nothing. Elias will rot. Even if he lives, he'll be forever changed, a cripple, a mutant. The people think less of the deformed. No matter who they are, he won't be as well loved." Indune smiled. "And Margrave Reinhardt will have to look upon his son's waxy body, dead or crippled. Another of his family, beaten and broken." Even the knights were taken aback by the severity of Indune's words, but none dared to add a word of protest. "We head north," Indune concluded, pulling his horse away. "Perhaps northwest, far away from the south, back into the safety of the northern lands." "Safety, ha," he laughed. "Scheming nobles at every turn, plague in every corner. And the plague is to be our priority. We must stop its spread. Isolate it in the south. Keep the north separate." "This was a huge blunder by my father," but it can still be turned into an advantage. I care not if we must butcher and burn refugees, cast their body to the earth. The North will stay strong. The prince was the first to move his horse, riding away into the winter-ridden plains ahead. His knights followed seconds later, ever removed from their fickle master's whims and desperately struggling to keep pace. Chapter 178, Herald of the 96. There were a few reasons that Argrave had chosen to come into Orion's hand and collaborate with him. The first was that the prince did genuinely intend to combat the waxpox and nothing more. He had no ulterior motives, no sinister plots, nothing of the kind. He was dangerous, to be sure, but Argrave was sure he could avoid drawing any of Orion's ire. The man was quite tolerant as long as one avoided the sore points. What's more, Argrave wasn't sure he could succeed without Orion's help. The last thing Argrave had been expecting was to deal with another Vasker in the northwest. Magnus' sharp grey eyes scrutinized Argrave and those that had come with him as he drew closer. Magnus, Argrave greeted. Had no idea you were here. The prince looked at him. Argrave had grown used to people being taken aback or even flinching when gazing at his miscolored eyes, but he showed no such aversion. Argrave willed himself to see the magic around, and Magnus' figure swirled with black gaseous magic. Argrave judged him at well into C rank. It matched with his knowledge of Magnus within Heroes of Berenda. Fortunately, the prince entirely ignored Argrave's greeting, turning to Orion. I think we family should take some time to speak in private, he suggested. His voice was apathetic yet firm as ever, and he spoke quietly to avoid drawing the attention of the crowd behind him. Argrave tensed at the suggestion. He did not wish to be isolated from his companions. Orion alone was no trouble. If he wanted Argrave dead, they probably wouldn't stand much of a chance, but Magnus was the wildcard. Orion took his hand from Argrave's shoulder. Indeed, perhaps it should be so. My companions are like my family, Argrave interrupted at once. I trust it's no trouble if they come, but they don't share your blood, Orion noted coldly. Indeed, only one shares your species. It is good you are open-minded, as many of our 96 gods extol it as a virtue, but blood is blood. Blood is sacred. Argrave looked back at his party. A plan quickly formed in his mind, but he hesitated to go through with it. He locked gazes with Annalise. It's prudent, and she'd be upset if I keep trying to shelter her. Argrave turned his head back, taking a deep breath. You'll at least allow my fiancé to accompany me. Magnus turned his head away, expression unchangingly cold, while Orion's whole face seemed to light up. He stepped up to Argrave and grabbed his shoulders, pulling him in. His whole party was uneased by Orion's actions. Is that her, wearing the mask? Orion whispered into his ear, staring at Annalise. He hunched down and stared over Argrave's shoulder. Yes, her name is Annalise, Argrave confirmed just as quietly. I am embarrassed to admit I do not know her. He continued. It would be more surprising if you knew her. Argrave pushed Orion away a little. We met recently. I made this choice on my own, as is my right as a baseborn. Orion stood straight once more. He strode over to Annalise and placed one fist over his heart, bowing deeply. Greetings, Lady Annalise. I am Argrave's brother, a faithful devoted of the gods, and Prince Orion of House Vasker. It is pleasant to meet you, she said after some time. I shall endeavor to maintain that pleasantness, he continued, straightening from his bow. You are my brother's betrothed? She looked at Argrave. Yes, Argrave and I are engaged. Orion nodded enthusiastically. Then you are soon to join the family. Even if you may never bear the name of Vasker, you will still be my sister-in-law. Such an exciting thing. Orion stepped back to Argrave. Come, he commanded, voice cold, as though whatever warmth he displayed seconds ago was just a lie. He and Magnus walked away, and Annalise strode up to Argrave. Fiancé? She questioned. Argrave took a deep breath and exhaled. Does this bother you? No, but... She crossed her arms. It was necessary, he said. And besides, like I told you, I won't compromise on you. I know this isn't a particularly romantic way of going about this, but this is what I want. Let me ask you seriously. Want to get engaged? Argrave shifted, then added, I'll understand if you say no, even if we get along extremely well. It has been a brief time since we met. The last thing I want is to pressure you into this. Argrave barely spotted the edges of her cheek flushing from behind the humorless mask, but she quickly gathered herself. Of course I want to, but now is not the time to be lost in these matters. I certainly wish to discuss this more, but for now. Magnus? He is an unexpected variable. Yeah, that's a fitting description for him altogether. Argrave nodded, refocusing himself away from the sweetness and light. Guilliman, Duran. You'll wait here, cause no problems. Both nodded, and Duran gave him a little wink. Good luck. Seems all you deal with is Kraz. Guilliman silenced Duran with a flick of his finger before he could say something that might provoke the large crowd still around them. Argrave gave them both a nod, then departed with Annalise just beside him. Quick rundown, Argrave said quietly, following where his two brothers had left. Magnus is the wildcard of the family. He doesn't care for power, wealth, or his family. He just wants to do what he wants, whenever he wants. That's why he wanders the continent. And you want me to try and discern why he is here? Annalise followed his line of thought. If it never comes up, yeah, Argrave nodded. Orion is almost nauseatingly intense. All of his emotions are so powerful, constantly in flux. She shook her head. And he wears them on his sleeve. As such, I will try and focus on Magnus. Argrave nodded, agreeing fully. Exactly what I was going to suggest. Read me like a book, as usual. You. He felt a strange surge in his chest, an overpowering positivity that did away with all of his negative thoughts and spurred him to speak. So easy to work with you. He could not see Annalise smile behind the solemn white mask she wore, but Argrave saw her cheeks move and knew she did. They entered into the room of the keep that Orion and Magnus had disappeared into. It was a bedroom, where most of the furniture had rotted away. A new table had been set up in the center to accommodate many different documents, splayed out haphazardly. 2 wax knights stood guard inside the room. Loyal knights, leave us be, Orion directed before Argrave had even fully entered. They obeyed quickly and unquestioningly, moving past their pair and shutting the partially rotten wooden door behind them. Magnus stared at Annalise, and Argrave walked to block his line of sight. He locked gazes with Argrave, and then pointed. She wears a mask. Why? To combat the disease, Argrave explained, then gestured for Annalise to remove it. She did for a moment, then put it back on just as quickly. An elf, Magnus said without much inflection. Queer choice for a queer man. Orion's hand pounded Magnus back like a sledgehammer. Argrave hadn't even seen him close the distance. Magnus staggered, coughing, but Orion held the back of his neck. Hurtful words, Orion said. Imagine if you hurt either of them with those words. He clenched the back of Magnus' neck tightly, making the man squirm. We don't hurt family. Though men forget, there are 96 gods in our pantheon, 2 of whom are patrons to elves. I will not tolerate intolerance, least of all from a member of the royal family. Be a better example to our youngest. He finished, leaning in. His grip released, and Magnus fell to one knee, giving Orion a glare as he rubbed the back of his neck. Definitely not here out of family camaraderie, Argrave realized, gaining some sympathy for his brother. Considering Magnus had ignored him the first time he asked this question, Argrave phrased it differently, directing it towards both Orion and Magnus. How long have you 2 been here together? Argrave stepped closer. Magnus arrived 2 days ago, Orion said as he pulled the fallen prince back up. He bent down and personally brushed the dirt off Magnus' knee once he'd risen to his feet. Argrave nodded, then continued, why? That's for me to know, Magnus stubbornly refused. Even still, if you insist. Argrave shook his head. Though I'm sure there's much that we, family, have to catch up on, we have other priorities. Orion, this plague is the biggest threat to Berenda right now. He got to the point, hoping to sidestep this conversation of family altogether. Orion turned back, face solemn. Indubitably, he concurred. It is the way of the world that disease should ravage the world. Whether death by blade, death by age, or death by rot, all are part of the cycle that the heavens mandate. Yet even still, the gods have placed us on this earth to live. He preached, placing his hand to his heart. And so, it is our duty to prioritize abating this great loss of life, divinely ordained though it may be. Argrave stepped closer to Orion. He felt like he was holding his hand out to a coiled snake, but his steps were steady nonetheless. Orion, this plague isn't something made by our gods. The towering prince grew still at once. He turned his head ever so slowly towards Argrave, then reached his hand out to rest it on Argrave's shoulder. Speak carefully, brother, he said coldly. You verge on the forbidden. Argrave kept his gaze even, staring slightly upwards towards the taller man. You've been in the thick of things, so you know best. The people's blood, it's black. You might just accept that as a symptom of a disease, but it's a symptom of something larger. This disease, this waxpox, it doesn't spread like normal diseases. You've had mages in this refugee camp with the waxpox. Yes, Orion nodded slowly. High and low, great and ungrateful, all seeking the blessings of the one blessed by the gods. Then you'll note it spreads fastest on mages. Argrave raised his hand. Not a coincidence. Though the disease fuels itself with ambient magic, it also fuels itself on its host's magic. The blood turns black for this reason, no other. Orion took his hand off Argrave's shoulder. Nothing escapes my memory. I know you are right in this matter, but you prove none of your earlier words. The gods have done stranger things than conjure fell diseases. I can prove this. Argrave nodded. Not 10 years ago, this region, the northwest. There were 8 noble houses in these wetlands, each with grand fortresses not unlike this one. Argrave waved around. This region was conquered from the swamp folk, practically exterminated to the last. Now, the wetlands have claimed each and every noble house, each perishing under strange circumstances, their seats lost in myriad ways. Now, no one's ventured into the deep wetlands since. No one's returned from them, at least. You come here to connect coincidence to this plague? Magnus disparaged, but Orion raised his hand to silence his brother. You say you can prove this, Orion continued. With such certainty on your tongue, with those eyes of conviction. Tell me your conclusion. Argrave shifted. The other reason he had come to Orion so readily was because he was sure the man could be convinced of things that seemed outlandish. One of the swamp people yet lives, and she harnesses the power of their gods to spread this plague. This is the knowledge I came to deliver to you. Magnus scoffed, but Orion reeled backwards. He staggered and put one hand against the table to support himself from falling. His wild actions made everyone obviously uneased. Argrave's gaze was drawn towards Orion's hand. The black plate gauntlet he wore began to grow red. The enchantments on his armor started to shine, as though resisting being damaged. "I knew I should have acted earlier," he said as though haunted. The wooden table started to blacken, and Argrave realized that this was Orion's doing. He stepped forward and said, "Orion, watch the hand," the words flowing almost by instinct. Orion lifted his hand up. Small embers persisted on the wooden table. The prince gazed at his red-hot gauntlets, watching as they slowly cooled. "Argrave," Orion turned his head, clenching his fist. "You are my brother. The gods teach us to treat our family well, to give them priority. Especially we members of the royal family, ordained by the gods to rule over man. Just because you are base-born does not strip us of sharing fathers. Even still, there are greater things at stake that prevent me from listening to your words without question," he said, voice a low growl. "I didn't come here with an expectation of subverting your activities here." Argrave nodded at once. "I'll do what needs to be done to prove my words, set things in motion. All I need is to be met halfway." He spread his arms out. Chapter 179, Purpose Established. "Met halfway?" Orion repeated Argrave's claims. Argrave nodded. "I know your situation. Without you, this camp falls apart. Your blessings are the only thing keeping the vast majority of the people in this camp alive, and more come every day." Argrave stepped closer. "But with this many people, things become more difficult with each new body. Even with spellcasters to create clean drinking water, food is a pressing concern in these wetlands. You have to dedicate your royal nights to hunting just to sustain this place. And even then, the creatures of the northwest aren't the easiest to swallow." Argrave stepped just before Orion, staring up at his older brother. Orion pressed more, asking, "What will you do, then?" "I'll get what's needed to justify action, to justify an expedition into the wetlands, where we can put an end to the swamp folk's gods. I'll set things in motion. All I need is help when the time comes." Argrave held out his hand. "Focus on your duty. I will focus on mine." A normal person might question all of Argrave's actions, his claims. Argrave had never before plainly stated the root cause of the land's troubles to anyone besides his companions, not with the Vadaman, nor anywhere else. But Orion was far from normal. Orion grasped Argrave's hand. Argrave could still feel some intense heat from Orion's earlier display. "The gods whisper true. The tallest trees grow and sprout from the smallest seed sown. It seems you stand tall as testament to that." Argrave tried to pass his meaning, but Orion pulled him in and hugged him once more before he could ponder deeply. Argrave accepted it, knowing that refusal was not an option. "A herd wanders if left alone for too long. I cannot let them go to astray. I must return to the people." He patted Argrave's shoulder, then released him. "Wait here. My knights will escort you to a room within a keep for you and my future sister-in-law, and a separate one for your companions. I will await your proof, Argrave. I hope for your sake you speak truly. Know that the gods do not like lies of such proportions, and I am the instrument to express their displeasure." After bowing to Annalise respectfully, Orion left the room, closing the door behind him. Argrave watched the door, then glanced at Annalise before finally turning to meet Magnus. The prince still stood there with arms crossed. "So, little BB brother," Magnus said, imitating a stutter. "What is this? Get a new set of eyes, a woman at your arms, and you think that the world will part for you? Don't act like you care. Go back to eating, drinking, and whoring yourself to an early grave." Argrave waved his hand. Magnus crossed his arms and grew silent. It seemed to finally be dawning on him that things had changed vastly from when Argrave had been Argrave. "Can't picture why you're here. You're a hedonist. You do what you want," Argrave noted, stepping closer. "Someone like you has no place at the heart of a plague. Are you gathering information for the bat, looking for a pretty penny? Heard rumors of something desirable, seeking to make it your own? Maybe you're trying to use Orion as a cudgel for some scheme?" The questions were many and largely unfounded, but with Annalise's presence, he hoped one of his wild guesses might bear fruit and draw a reaction from the taciturn prince. Magnus stared up at Argrave. "And I should buy your ridiculous story of wanting to help Orion?" "I don't expect you to buy my story." "Good thing for me, I'm not selling it to you." Argrave shook his head. "It's a waste of time talking to you. Go back to wandering, be a happy man. And if you don't, well, don't step on my toes. Might be I have to show you why I'm so confident." All of the sudden, Prince Magnus scrutinized Argrave carefully. There was tension, and Argrave kept his focus on Magnus' hands in case the man tried something. Argrave knew that, despite their relative equality in terms of magic ranking, Magnus had many enchanted items vested unto him by his father. Even still, he was sure he could win. He partly wished Magnus would try something. Magnus walked past Argrave, sparing one last glance at Annalise before opening the door and leaving. Argrave let out a sigh of relief once the door had closed. "Anger should not spur you so easily," Annalise said at once. Argrave walked to the table and scanned the documents on it. They were mostly maps for the region, refusals of requests for supplies, and other such mundane things. Orion did nothing underhanded. so perhaps it was a waste of time. After a time, Argrave lifted his head. Magnus isn't pivotal for anything. He doesn't even travel with an escort of royal guards like most of the other princes. No danger, no use. Why hold my tongue? It felt nice. These things are only certainties in the world you knew, she pointed out, walking closer. Magnus may not be consigned to just that. Argrave's next words caught. You're right, he admitted. There's deeper meaning for his being here, has to be. Speaking of, did you? She shook her head. I gleaned nothing of his motivations. He and Orion are like opposites. If one is an explosion of light, the other is a grey slate. Magnus felt little, not anger, not happiness, not anything. Argrave nodded. Yeah, the oldest and the youngest children of Felipe's second queen, polar opposites. Annalise stepped around Argrave to look at the documents herself. Yet despite Magnus, everything went more or less as you expected. We will set the groundwork, and then Orion will. She looked up at him. What was it you said those weeks ago? Put the ball into the hole. Argrave finished, shaking his head. Golf, living in Berenda really puts into perspective how lavish there. A knock came at the door, cutting Argrave off. Soon after, the door was opened, and some of Orion's wax knights entered. Our Holiness has instructed us to assign you and your companions a room, the knight said. The northwestern wetlands were a late-game area in Heroes of Berenda. Always, everything deep in this foggy wasteland was monstrously dangerous. Though putting an end to the plague took place relatively early in the main quest, that was only because the player had help. Orion and the Wax Knights facilitated things. It was the reverse of an escort quest. The issue still stood, though, of the proof that Argrave needed to get. It seemed a fundamentally unqualifiable claim. The only logical way to prove this conspiracy of his was to put an end to it. Considering the danger of the wetlands, that proved to be an impossible task. The last of the swamp folk occupied the fortress deepest within the vast wetlands. They couldn't go without help. Of course, ending the plague alone was possible, theoretically. But realistically, he didn't care to see any of his companions dead. Even still, there was another way. The gods of the swamp folk were not united in this spread of the plague. You need no time to prepare? Glimmen questioned. You want to stick around and prepare? Really? Argrave questioned. The last thing I need is intense scrutiny from Orion, a tribal from the deep south, 2 snow elves, one of whom is suffering from a certain bloodborne condition, and me? Argrave shook his head at once. We establish our presence. We set out to handle our part before we get entangled, and we finish this as quick as we can. I've already delayed enough. Not even a day's rest. Durin adjusted his pack. And you're sure we can leave our things there? No one can get past the Wax Knights, save perhaps B-rank or higher mages, and they'll be guarding the keep constantly. Orion is unique, certainly, but he's not a petty thief. He's not even a grand thief, Argrave assured. Do you think I'm fond of the idea of risking all our books, our horses? I wouldn't do this without certainty. Durin nodded and shrugged. Fine. I guess they might weigh us down when we're sieging a god. God is a loose term. It doesn't denote anything special about anyone. Cultists can worship a man, declare him a god. He becomes a god, ostensibly, but is he really that powerful? Argrave explained, seeking to soften the impact of the word. All we fight is a unique existence, and I assure you, we're capable of this much. Argrave clenched his hands tight. Annalise opened her eyes, and her star sparrow landed on his shoulder. I think I've rooted out a good path. I marked the trees with my bird. I'll tell you what to look for. Argrave nodded, then pulled his boots and gloves a little tighter. With Argrave leading, their party of 4 pushed into the vast wetlands beyond Orion's makeshift camp. The only to see them leave were the few refugees up so early in the dawn. The place was still mostly frozen, and all the 4 of them could see their breath in the air. Even still, they moved onwards into the frozen over wastes ahead. You're sure that his eyes were black and gold? Mina of Veden questioned, sitting behind a desk. Her resplendent golden hair had grown a fair bit longer, descending past her shoulders. She had tired eyes, but it seemed to dim her focus none. I, my lady, a knight bearing Veden's heraldry, a white hair, bowed. He held his helmet beneath the crook of his arm. She tapped her finger on the desk. And he mentioned me, specifically? She sought to confirm, to which the knight nodded. She leaned back in the chair, thinking. After a time, she questioned, his body, what did he look like? Was he skinny? The knight licked his lips, then adjusted the helmet beneath his arm nervously. He was a great and imposing man. I am afraid he wore a thick grey duster, so it was difficult to perceive his exact stature. He had midnight black hair. Beyond that, I told my lady, his eyes were black and gold. I place him as a mage, Lady Mina. Mina looked dissatisfied. Eventually, she leaned in and questioned, did he travel with anyone? He rode away from a group of 3. The distance was great, and it was difficult to. Did any among them have white hair? Mina pressed, leaning further forth on her elbows. As I recall. Yes, there was one. Though, it was. I question if it was not a shawl, or a cowl, my lady, so long it was. Mina fell into a silence, once again falling back into the chair. She pushed her feet against the edge of the desk, balancing on two legs of the chair as she swayed back and forth. She gazed out the window where she could see the refugee camps. She didn't look content with any of the knight's answers, which very clearly made the knight uncomfortable. She released her foot from the desk, and the chair balancing on two legs clashed to the ground with a loud noise. She fixed the knight with her golden-eyed glare, then commanded, "Fetch other knights that were on guard duty that day. Inquire about this party, get more details." The knight looked happy to simply be given orders. He placed his fist to his heart and bowed at once. "My lady." As he made to leave, Mina called out, "Wait." The knight paused, turning. "If you run into any of the castle's stable workers, have them prepare a horse for me to go out, just in case." The knight stepped back into the room. "Go out, Lady Mina?" "Your father, I solved his trade crisis for him. He never showed any interest in his ninth child before. Why should he protect me now? If I wish to go out, I will go out." "Do as I say," she finished, waving the knight away with her small hands. The knight left hastily. It was only once he was a great distance away did Mina sigh. Gods be damned. Chapter 180, Marred Hallowed Grounds. Having a pre-planned route makes travel all the faster, especially when good terrain is chosen. When traversing uncharted wetlands, such a thing was largely impossible. With Annalise's Star Sparrow, though, they picked out a relatively flat and dry route devoid of many obstacles. It facilitated quick travel through the northwest. And their destination was not so far, fortunately. The Star Sparrow could only scout so far ahead, though, because a great power restricted passage further ahead. As the day neared dusk, the cold, foggy wetlands bloomed into a scene more befitting a summer retreat, colors of all sorts abounding from brilliant, wide-petaled flowers growing off vines and trees and all manner of exotic flora. The temperature of the air did not change, so it was a jarring transition, almost unnatural. Yet as they proceeded deeper, the little microcosm of beauty was marred. Though it affected plants nowhere else, here, the waxpox morphed what was beautiful into golden-brown pockmarked monstrosities that curled and twisted and writhed in unpleasant ways which, though motionless, gave Argrave the impression of bug legs and tentacles. Everything goes silent ahead. Gilliman stopped Argrave from proceeding onwards, hand placed before his chest. Argrave pushed Gilliman's hand off of him. "We're entering another realm. It'd be stranger if you could hear." As they proceeded, the sounds did indeed quiet. The entire wetlands around them had become grotesque. Even the roads they had entered to come here were not so ugly. But as they pushed past, Argrave's ears popped, and a sight of incomprehensible beauty spread out before him, like an illusion shattering. Before them was a great crater of rushing water laid out in a perfect circle. Water flowed from every bit of this circle towards the center. Great wooden platforms rested atop the rushing water, but they were not built. Instead, the bridges were formed of natural-grown trees, and hosted plant life uncountable. There were archways of vines hosting bulbous flowers, golden lily pads persisting atop the swift water, and towering trees with beautiful, myriad-color fruits dangling from their leaves. There was one thing marring this beauty. A jagged path, the same ugly brown rot as the land they'd emerged from, cut across the verdant landscape, like a lightning bolt of decay striking at the center of the place. Even despite that, the beauty was incomprehensible, and Argrave took a moment to gather himself. Everyone did. The game had called this place the Marred Hallowed Grounds. Argrave had been here time and time again. If any place could be called a land of the gods. Durrant stepped out, head turning to appreciate the sight. Annalise stepped forward, her curiosity consuming her. But Argrave stopped her by grabbing her waist. "Careful, this place is not friendly to us." Annalise nodded, and Argrave released his grip. "Shame about the scar," Durrant continued, eyes trailing the path of rot that led to the center. "If it weren't for that little bolt of waxpox, we would never see this place," Argrave noted. "The plague was used for an attack, striking directly at this land, without it having already broken the barrier to this place. We'd never enter here. This place is hidden to the world." Durrant ground his foot against the ugly brown mess below his feet. "Suppose I should thank it." Argrave sighed, and his brimsters finally jumped out of his clothing, shaking their graying fur out. Their fur darkened every day as they consumed the souls of the fallen, and their use to the party grew every day. "I want us to keep going. We have fights to get through." Reminded of that, Durrant's levity disappeared. He tapped his glaive against the ground, pulled his wyvern scale helmet off his pack and placed it over his head, and gave Argrave a nod. "All right." To reiterate, "We move towards the center," Argrave said, stepping forth and turning around. "The sentinels of the master of this land roam this place. They're dangerous. They take the shape of animals, though druidic magic does nothing against them. But they're weakened by the waxpox, and they're big and loud. Once the fighting starts, it won't stop." "There's a place ideal for." Gilliman grabbed Argrave and pulled him back, turning him in the same motion. Opposite their party of four, a gargantuan white wolf stepped up atop one of the wooden platforms, front paw on the edge. It lowered its head. Part of its face was consumed by the waxpox, leaving one side of it more slack as it growled. Argrave shifted uneasily. As he did so, the wolf raised its head and howled. The noise echoed across the great crater, setting the beautiful place stirring. "Good lord!" Argrave clenched his fist, brain working quickly. Someone else's brain worked faster, though. Annalise shouted, "This is a terrible spot. We can be surrounded on 3 sides. Head for that bridge. We must narrow the avenues they can approach from," she advised Argrave. Despite Annalise's words, they waited for Argrave's command. "Let's go." "Rightward bridge," Argrave confirmed her advice. Gilliman took point. The great wolf jumped down from the wooden platform, splashing into the shallow rushing water and hurtling towards them with a limp. The beast was threatening enough. It was tempting to reach for the blessing of supersession, but he dared not use it this early. Annalise was the first to attack, sending forth the C-rank ice spear. The beast nimbly ducked, the spear grazing against its shoulder and hurtling past. The wolf lunged forth towards Gilliman, the leading target. The elven vampire swung preemptively, and his enchanted greatsword summoned a blade of wind. It split open the wolf's snout, and it staggered back. Durin pressed forth, using the only C-rank spell he'd learned, Tempest. The spell, a great whirlwind meant for blocking projectiles, hovered before him harmlessly, but he swung his glaive through it. The spell clung to the wyvern bone blade, and he carried the swing onwards towards the wolf, slicing it in the leg. The attack was devastating, and the beast staggered. As the beast faltered, Argrave sprinted forth around Gilliman and Durin while he conjured the D-rank gore scalpel. His wrist split open, and his black blood surged out from his glove, forming a dark maroon knife in his hand. He sunk it into the wolf's head and it passed through as easily as butter, dispatching it instantly. The spell dissipated in his hand, and Argrave gathered his team with a simple, "Keep moving." The once serene crater became a hive of activity and sound. The wolf's howl had summoned everything in the vast crater over, and until they dealt with the vast majority of the sentinels, their progress would not continue. The 4 of them ran off the rotted lands and onto the first of the many wooden platforms forming bridges across the vast crater. Argrave took the rear to ensure that everyone made it safely, his Brimmersinners clambering about at his feet. They stepped across the wooden platform, doing their best to avoid stumbling over the myriad beautiful flowers in the landscape. As they made their way towards the bridge, a titanic alligator lunged up out of a deeper portion of the water, collapsing onto the wooden platform and shaking it terribly. Several man-sized beetles crawled down off its back. Panicked, Argrave shouted, "Its tongue is a projectile." The word seemed nonsensical until the alligator's maw opened wide, tongue propelling forth like a chameleon's towards Annalise. His warning prepared her, and she managed to conjure a ward with her enchanted ring in time to block the ridiculously fast tongue. The golden shield shook, but held firm, and the waxbox-infected tongue puffed out a cloud of diseased air from the impact. "Stay back," Annalise shouted as Durin moved to punish the enemy's overextension. "I shall clear a path." She dispelled the ward and stepped forth. She held one hand out, feet braced tightly against the ground. Argrave used Garm's eyes to view the magic within, and he saw the great roiling black mass of magic within whirl as though a hurricane ran through it. A great bunch of it surged to her hands, forming the lines of the spell matrix, 1 dimension, 2 dimension, 3 dimension, and beyond, into the 4th dimension, whereupon the matrix spun rapidly, forming a B-rank spell. 2 great blades of ice appeared before her, each held by a set of frozen arms attached at the shoulder. They braced for a swing, then spun forth, cutting through whatever was ahead like a saw blade run amok. The swarming beetles were blasted away, some bisected entirely. It continued past the beetles, striking the alligator's tongue as it retracted before cutting into the giant beast itself. When the blades of ice struck its whole mass, they shattered. The wetland reptile reeled backwards, its mouth cut open unnaturally large with blood pouring from gaping wounds. It fell off the wooden platform, clearly on death's door. The path to the bridge was clear. Annalise staggered a little, breathing heavily, and her star sparrow chirped noisily, flying about her head. Argrave stepped forward and supported her. B-rank magic was where things became truly destructive. She used a spell of her people, Icebound Twin Blades. Vadiamon ice magic was always potent, made doubly so by actual Vadiamon casting it. But destructive meant costly. Argrave could see her magic supply was greatly diminished. As she gained her bearings, he said evenly, "Conserve your energy in case it's needed. You've made a path to the bridge, now let the 3 of us take the lead." She took a moment to catch her breath, and then confirmed, "I understand. I will support with wards from my ring." Argrave shouted once more and they began moving again, headed for the bridge. Argrave led Annalise along until she was fully recovered, whereupon the 4 of them sprinted to the vast bridge unmolested. Argrave realized it was indeed a good spot for a fight. It was elevated higher than the platform, so nothing could jump from the water, and they had only 2 directions enemies could approach from. The 4 took their place atop the highest point of the natural-grown bridge, where an archway shed rose-colored leaves in the air. The Brimmersinners spread their fog and song across the land as a great many beasts came out of the woodworks of this beautiful place. Their party worked in tandem beautifully to confront the tides of waxbox-infected predators. Annalise played the role of the defender, warding off the heavier attacks, and all trusted her enough to let her play this role. Argrave's Brimmersinners conjured warriors of mist to function as crowd control, while Argrave himself dealt strategic blows with lightning magic, disrupting to allow Gilliman and Durin land decisive attacks. At first, the myriad sentinels like unnaturally fast snapping turtles and the swooping bats were manageable with simple spells. But soon enough, All of the great beasts within this vast place began to creep towards the bridge, slowly pushing their line back further and further. Argrave used Garm's eyes to cast spells. It was the first time he had utilized the ability in genuine battle because it obscured his vision, but it did save his life. If not for the fact that many of their assailants were crippled by the waxpox, the battle would have been over in seconds with their party's total demise. A snake with a body as thick as a tree wound around the bridge, then lunged forth at Duran. Annalise blocked the attack, then dispelled the ward moments before Duran counterattacked with a fire spell supplanted by a thrust of his glaive. The blade cut through the snake's head, making its coil around the bridge go slack and fall into the rushing waters below. Duran laughed. "Any big plays in mind?" "You see the writing on the wall, Argrave." Argrave's mind toyed with the trigger for the blessing of supersession as he laid eyes on a distant pack of gathering wolves, each as large as the first he'd confronted. They barreled past the other slower predators, heading towards the four of them. "Can't use the blessing of supersession. You have a bigger fight ahead." "You know what would work?" "It's just a little pain," another voice said within Argrave, pushing past all his doubt. If you like this audiobook, subscribe the channel for more videos like this. And join my Patreon if you want to support me, where you can find the complete collection Jackal Among Snakes audiobooks. Hurry up, what are you waiting for? Leave some comment and let me know if you guys like this story, or you have a web novel you like and want to hear its audiobook. I will be happy to create them for you. Please like, share, and leave a comment on the video.